Hey everyone, I'm Noah. Welcome to my video. Queen Camilla accused a royal guard, claimed he posed a threat to her safety, said his silence was suspicious, that he was holding on to something dangerous. He was removed quietly from duty. No headlines, no explanation, just gone. But 3 days later, he walked into Parliament and opened a sealed envelope he'd kept hidden for over 2 decades. Inside was a letter handwritten by Princess Diana months before her death. A letter no one was ever supposed to read. A letter about infidelity, betrayal, and what she feared the public would never believe. And by the time he finished reading, Camilla's image wasn't just damaged, it was completely shattered. Now, before we show you exactly what that letter said, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, Guard Watch. And don't forget to drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will shake you to the core. The bells of St. George's Chapel carried that particular weight only royal events could summon. Not celebration, not mourning, something carefully balanced between grief and continuity. It was a commemorative service for Queen Elizabeth II, 1 year after her passing. The October morning was crisp enough to make breath visible, autumn settling over Windsor with centuries of practiced precision. Foreign ambassadors filled the ancient pews, their medals catching light from windows that had witnessed kings crowned and buried. Television cameras positioned themselves at respectful distances, lenses trained on faces that history would remember differently depending on what happened next. Among the ceremonial guards posted throughout the chapel, one man drew no particular attention. That was exactly how it was supposed to be. Corporal Alaric Bell stood near the west nave entrance with the stillness that comes from 34 years of being watched while watching back. At 56, his scarlet tunic was immaculate. Every detail perfect down to the gleam of brass buttons and the precise angle of his bearskin hat. But it was his eyes that marked him as different from the younger guards, deeper, like someone who'd spent decades learning to notice what others missed entirely. He'd been stationed at dozens of royal events before, weddings, funerals, state visits, where dignitaries walked past without a second glance. Today felt different though, the particular alertness that comes from sensing when something was about to shift. When Queen Camilla's procession reached his position, she moved with practiced grace down the chapel's centre aisle, her heels clicking against stones that had heard similar footsteps for 800 years. As she passed Bell's position, she glanced right with the casual acknowledgement royalty gives to ceremonial guards. Not quite looking through them, but not quite seeing them either. But Bell wasn't just another anonymous face beneath the bearskin hat. Their eyes met for perhaps half a second. To the cameras it looked like nothing, a routine glance. But to anyone who understood the language of recognition, something else had just occurred. The Queen's stride didn't falter, but something behind her eyes shifted. A flicker that might have been memory or might have been fear. The royal aide beside her noticed the subtle change in her breathing. When they reached the front pews, he leaned in. "Your Majesty, the guard near the entrance," she said quietly. Third from the left. "I need him removed immediately, Your Majesty," discreetly after the second hymn. 20 minutes later, 2 security officers quietly approached Bell. He was replaced without announcement, escorted away while cameras never blinked. A brief notice appeared in the palace bulletin. Corporal Alaric Bell, relieved of ceremonial duty pending protocol clarification. As to say. But within hours, screenshots appeared on veteran forums, and in a quiet pub in Alershot, a retired warrant officer stared at his phone and muttered, "He shouldn't have done that, not to Bell." The first tabloid stories appeared 18 hours later, small pieces carefully worded, completely devastating. Royal Guard removed after security alert. Queen's eagle eye spots potential threat. No named sources, just palace insiders who painted Camilla as the vigilant monarch who'd spotted danger and Bell as the unstable veteran whose subtle signs of agitation had triggered his removal. By the second day, the narrative was complete. Social media experts analysed photos, claiming to spot tension in Bell's posture. Someone discovered his Northern Ireland service, suggesting potential resentment. The palace said nothing if his silence felt deliberate, allowing speculation to do work that statements couldn't accomplish. Meanwhile, veteran networks began pushing back quietly. Former guardsmen posted about Bell's character, his spotless record spanning 4 monarchs. They shared stories of his mentorship, his dedication, which led to the question appearing in comment sections everywhere. If Bell wasn't a threat, why did Queen Camilla want him gone? Room 14 of the Parliamentary Select Committee wasn't built for moments that change history. Grey walls, fluorescent lighting, institutional furniture that suggested efficiency over comfort. But when Corporal Alaric Bell entered carrying a manila envelope, the room felt different, heavier. He wore a dark civilian suit that somehow made him look more military than his uniform ever had. No briefcase, no prepared statements, just that aged envelope he placed carefully on the witness table. The committee chairman cleared his throat. Corporal Bell, you may speak freely, Bell stood. I'm not here to defend my actions, he said clearly. Because nothing I did at St. George's Chapel requires defence. The MPs shifted in their seats. I'm here because the truth about that day has been buried under speculation, and because some truths, once they surface, can't be pushed back down. He reached for the envelope, handling it with careful respect. For 26 years, I have kept something that was never meant to exist, something I was ordered to destroy, but chose to preserve. I did this not out of disobedience, but out of duty. The chairman leaned forward. Are you suggesting you have evidence relevant to your removal? I'm suggesting my removal was based on recognition rather than suspicion. The Queen didn't see a threat. She saw a witness. He lifted the envelope, showing the broken and reapplied wax seal. This letter was handed to me by mistake in July 1990. It was meant for the then Prince of Wales. It came from Kensington Palace, delivered by a courier who was clearly shaken. And you opened it. I was instructed to dispose of it without reading it. Burn it. I recognised the handwriting. Someone whispered, Diana. Bell nodded. I couldn't destroy it, not without understanding what it contained. He began opening the envelope with deliberate care. A warning, a plea, and a prophecy that took 26 years to come true. He withdrew a single sheet of cream-coloured paper folded once and showing the wear of having been handled many times over the years. Even from across the room, the MP could see the elegant handwriting that covered most of the page. This letter was written by Diana, Princess of Wales, on July the 15th, 1997, 6 weeks before her death. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Bell held the letter carefully, supporting it with both hands as if it were made of glass rather than paper. She wrote it after a private meeting with the woman who is now Queen Camilla, a meeting that took place at Kensington Palace at 11 night with no official record and no witnesses except the guards posted outside. He looked up from the letter, his eyes finding each committee member in turn. I was one of those guards. For nearly a minute no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant traffic from the street outside. What does the letter say? One of the MP finally asked. Bell returned his attention to the worn paper in his hands. I'll read it exactly as she wrote it. His voice remained steady, but something in his tone suggested the weight of words that had been waiting decades to be spoken aloud. To whomever this reaches, I pray it's Charles, but if not, then let this be a record of what really happened tonight. The room had gone completely silent now, the kind of quiet that only occurs when everyone present understands they're about to hear something that will change everything they thought they knew. She came to see me tonight. Not officially. No appointment, no security detail, no palace record, just her and a single driver who waited outside while she explained how this was going to work. Bell paused, looking up from the letter to gauge the committee's reaction. What he saw in their faces was a mixture of fascination and dread. She wasn't cruel about it. That's what made it so chilling. She spoke about Charles's happiness, about the need for stability, about how messy divorces damaged the monarchy's reputation. She made it sound like she was doing me a favour by being so direct. One of the MP was taking notes now, her pen moving quickly across a legal pad. Others had stopped writing entirely, too focused on listening to document what they were hearing. Bell continued reading, his voice never wavering, despite the devastating nature of the words. She said the public would eventually accept her as queen, but only if I stepped aside gracefully. She said I could make it easy for everyone by embracing the divorce, maybe even appearing to welcome it. She said there were ways to make it look like my. She said there were ways to make it look like my idea.
But if I fought it, if I made things difficult, if I tried to use the children or the public's sympathy against her? Well, she said accidents happen to difficult people. She said it with a smile, like she was commenting on the weather. The committee chairman had gone very pale. She threatened the Princess of Wales. Bell looked up from the letter again. According to Diana's account, yes, but not directly, not in any way that could be recorded or proven, just suggestions about what might happen to people who didn't understand when it was time to disappear. He returned to the letter, his voice dropping slightly as he read the final paragraphs. I know how this sounds. I know it reads like paranoia or desperation, but I've learned to trust my instincts about people who smile when they threaten you. Ooh. And tonight, looking into her eyes, I saw someone who's been planning this conversation for years. If something happens to me, if I have an accident or suddenly decide I can't handle public life anymore, remember this meeting. Remember that some people get everything they want by making their competition disappear. And remember that not all disappearances are voluntary. Bell carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, his movements precise and respectful. She signed it with her full name and title. Then she sealed it and asked the courier to deliver it immediately to Charles wherever he was, but it never reached him. The chairman said it was intercepted by palace staff, who decided it was too dangerous to deliver. I was told to destroy it because the princess was clearly having another breakdown. And these kinds of letters only make everything worse. Bell placed the envelope on the table between himself and the committee members. 6 weeks later, Diana was dead, and the woman who'd visited her that night began her journey to becoming Queen of England. Silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was profound. The kind of stillness that occurs when people realise they've just witnessed something that will reshape everything they thought they understood about recent history. Finally, one of the MP found her voice. Corporal Bell, why didn't you come forward with this letter before now? His answer came without hesitation, because for 26 years I believed my duty was to protect the crown, even if it meant protecting it from its own secrets. I thought silence was service. He looked toward the envelope containing Diana's final warning. But when the Queen had me removed for recognising her, I realised that some secrets become more dangerous when they're kept than when they're revealed. Bell stood, leaving the envelope on the witness table. I'm not here to destroy anyone's reputation or damage the monarchy. I'm here because a woman wrote down the truth about what was done to her, and that truth deserves to be heard. Even if it took 26 years to find its voice, he walked toward the exit, then paused at the door. Diana wasn't paranoid. She wasn't having a breakdown. She was just inconveniently alive at a time when certain people needed her to be conveniently dead. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the committee members alone with a letter that would soon reshape British history, and a truth that no amount of royal protocol could ever bury again. Within hours, Diana's final warning would be front-page news around the world. And Queen Camila would discover that some witnesses, once they decide to speak, can't be silenced by removal from royal ceremonies. The letter remained on the witness table for nearly 10 minutes after Bell left. None of the committee members quite ready to touch something that carried such devastating implications. When the chairman finally reached for it, his hands were noticeably unsteady. The other MP gathered around as he carefully withdrew Diana's letter and read it again, this time looking for details they might have missed during Bell's recitation. The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's, the same elegant script that had signed thousands of charitable letters and personal notes over the years, but the words themselves carried a desperation that none of her public communications had ever revealed. We need to authenticate this immediately, one of the MPs said. Handwriting analysis, paper dating, everything. And we need to verify Bell's account of the events, another added. Palace records, duty rosters, anything that can corroborate his presence at Kensington Palace that night. But even as they discussed the technical aspects of verification, all of them understood that the letter felt authentic in ways that went beyond forensic analysis. The tone, the specific details, the casual references to palace protocol. These weren't things that could be easily fabricated by someone outside the royal household. More importantly, the letter explained something that had puzzled historians and royal biographers for decades.
Diana's apparent shift in attitude during her final weeks.
Her increased security concerns, her cryptic comments to friends about feeling watched, her sudden interest in recording conversations and documenting meetings that had previously been informal. Behaviour that had been dismissed as paranoia or attention-seeking now appeared in a different light.
Not the actions of someone losing her grip on reality, but the careful preparations of someone who understood she was in genuine danger. The committee spent the next 2 hours in closed session reviewing the letter and discussing how to proceed.
By the end of that time, they'd reached a unanimous decision. The matter would be referred immediately to the Metropolitan Police for investigation, and the letter would be released to the public after appropriate redactions to protect ongoing investigations. But they were already too late to control the narrative. Because while they'd been debating procedure and protocol, the story had begun to leak through the networks that connect Westminster insiders faster than any official communication system. Evening, journalists were making calls. By midnight, royal correspondents were frantically updating stories they'd thought were finished. And by dawn, the world would wake up to headlines that no amount of palace spin could soften. Diana's final warning letter reveals Camilla's threats. Accidents happen to difficult people. Princess predicted her own death. Royal Guard exposes 26-year cover-up of Diana's last letter. The palace's initial response was exactly what protocol demanded. A brief statement expressing concern about unsubstantiated allegations and promising full cooperation with any official investigation. Calm, measured, and completely inadequate for the firestorm that was about to engulf them, because Diana's letter wasn't just another scandal that could be managed through careful communication strategy. It was evidence of something far more serious. A pattern of behaviour that suggested her death might not have been the tragic accident the world had been told to believe. And once that possibility entered the public consciousness, no amount of royal dignity or institutional authority could push it back out again. Corporal Bell, meanwhile, had returned to his modest flat in shot and was preparing for a level of attention he'd spent 34 years avoiding. His phone had been ringing constantly since news of the committee hearing began to spread. He wasn't answering. Not yet. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table drinking tea and reading through a stack of letters he'd received from other veterans in the days since his removal from royal duties. Messages of support, offers of assistance, and most importantly, additional accounts from former palace staff who'd witnessed things they'd never been able to discuss publicly. Because Bell wasn't the only one who'd been keeping dangerous secrets. He was just the first one who'd found the courage to speak. And as night fell over London, in living rooms and pubs across the country, people who'd served the royal family in various capacities were having conversations they'd never expected to have. Conversations about what they'd seen, what they'd heard, and what they'd been asked to forget. The foundation of silence that had protected the monarchy's secrets for decades was beginning to crack. And tomorrow, when the full text of Diana's letter appeared in newspapers around the world, those cracks would become fractures that no amount of royal authority could repair. Queen Camilla's reign, which had seemed so secure just days earlier, was about to face its first, and possibly final, crisis. Because some truths, once they escape into daylight, cast shadows that no crown can overcome. The morning after Diana's letter dominated global headlines, Margaret Annesley decided she couldn't remain silent any longer. At 78, the former Kensington Palace housekeeper had spent 25 years in comfortable retirement, tending her garden in Surrey and watching the royal family from the respectful distance that all former palace staff maintained. She'd signed the Official Secrets Act, taken her pension, and kept her memories locked away where they couldn't hurt anyone. But reading Diana's words in the morning paper, words that perfectly matched conversations she'd overheard, but never understood until now, something inside her finally broke. She called the number listed at the bottom of the newspaper article and asked to be connected to the committee investigating Corporal Bell's allegations. When told that formal hearings weren't scheduled to resume for several days, she made it clear that what she had to say couldn't wait. I was there that night, she told the clerk who answered the phone, July 15th, 1997. I heard everything.
3 hours later, she was sitting in the same witness chair Bell had occupied, clutching a handwritten statement she'd prepared while waiting for the taxi to arrive. Unlike Bell, Margaret trembled slightly as she began to speak.
Not from fear, but from the weight of carrying secrets that had grown heavier with each passing year. I worked at Kensington Palace for 12 years, she said, her voice gaining strength as she found her rhythm. I was responsible for the overnight cleaning of the private quarters, which meant I was often there during hours when the family assumed they had complete privacy. The committee chairman, who'd had very little sleep since Diana's letter was made public, leaned forward attentively. On the night of July 15th, 1990, I was cleaning the corridor outside Princess Diana's study when I heard raised voices, not shouting exactly, but the kind of controlled anger that's somehow more frightening than screaming.
Margaret glanced down at her prepared statement, then seemed to decide she didn't need it. The princess was crying. I could hear her through the door trying to stay quiet, but unable to stop the tears.
And there was another woman's voice, very calm, very measured, explaining something that was clearly devastating to hear. Could you identify the other woman? Not immediately, but when I heard her laugh, this cold, satisfied sound, I recognised it.
I'd heard that laugh before during the Prince of Wales's visits to Highgrove. It belonged to Camilla Parker Bees. Margaret's hands tightened around her statement as she continued. I knew I shouldn't listen, but something about the tone made me stay. The princess sounded trapped, like someone who was being given an ultimatum rather than having a conversation. She looked directly at the committee members, her eyes carrying the weight of 26 years of suppressed knowledge. I heard Camilla say that Diana had two choices.
Cooperate with the divorce and accept whatever settlement was offered or face consequences that would make cooperation look wise in retrospect. The room had grown completely silent, except for the scratch of pens on paper as the MP took notes. Then I heard Camilla say something that's haunted me ever since. The public loves a tragic Princess Diana, but they love a living queen more. And accidents happen to people who forget which one they're supposed to be.
Margaret's voice broke slightly on the last sentence, and she paused to compose herself before continuing. The princess asked what that meant, and Camilla laughed again, said it meant exactly what Diana thought it meant, but that wouldn't come to that if Diana was sensible about the future. What happened after that? The chairman asked gently. Camilla left through the garden entrance where her car was waiting. No security escort, no official record, just a private visit that never happened to deliver a message that was never sent.
Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue she'd been clutching throughout her testimony. 20 minutes later, I was called to the princess's study to clean up some spilled wine, but when I got there, she wasn't drinking. She was writing furiously, like she was racing against time to get something down on paper. Did you see what she was writing? A letter, several pages actually. She looked up when I entered and said, Margaret, if anything ever happens to me, remember tonight. Remember that some people plan other people's accidents. Then she sealed the letter and asked me to have it delivered immediately to the Prince of Wales. Margaret looked down at her hands, which was shaking more noticeably now. I gave the letter to the courier as instructed, but later that week I overheard two senior aides discussing how dangerous it would be if Diana's paranoid fantasies reached the prince. They seemed relieved that the letter had been intercepted and destroyed. But it wasn't destroyed, one of the MP observed, because by then the damage was irreversible. Diana's letter had accomplished what its author had intended. It had created a permanent record of the truth that no amount of official denial could erase. So was a public opinion which had taken decades to fully accept Camilla as a legitimate member of the royal family shifted overnight. Protesters gathered outside royal residences calling for her abdication. Parliament began discussing the constitutional implications of a queen consort who might have orchestrated the murder of her predecessor. And in a modest flat in Aldershot, Corporal Alaric Bell watched the news coverage with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd finally done what needed to be done. He'd served the crown faithfully for 34 years, but his greatest service had been knowing when it was time to stop protecting it from the truth. Diana's final warning had taken 26 years to reach the public, but once it did, it changed everything. Some secrets, once exposed, can never be buried again. And some witnesses, once they find their voice, can bring down kingdoms with a whisper. What would you do if you knew a secret that could destroy the most powerful family in your country? Should Corporal Bell have spoken up 26 years ago?
Or was he right to wait until the truth couldn't be suppressed any longer? And if Diana really did predict her own murder, what does that say about the people we trust to lead us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Into the secrets powerful people don't want you to discover. Share this video with anyone whose stipulations into the secrets powerful people don't want you to discover. Share this video with anyone who still believes that some truths are too dangerous to tell truths to tell.
There's another story waiting for you right on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow with another reminder that the most important voices are often the ones that take decades to speak. Thanks for watching, and remember, not all accidents are accidental, and not all silences are golden.